In this video, what I want to do is to show you one way to think about labeling beats in everyday talk. And we're going to be working with this file here.
When's it due to be?
So
okay, quite soon.
you will have heard this in one of the lectures on timing in talk, and this is the bit that we're going to focus on.
When's it due to be? When's it due to be?
Where I think you should get the sense that when's it due to be is rhythmically produced. That's to say, it sounds like there's roughly equal beats between those stressed syllables. When's it due to be?
When's it due to be?
And you might think that the rhythm actually starts in the very first version of when, before she does the self-repair.
When's it due to be?
Okay, now what we want to do is to try to get some sense of this impression in a more technical, visible way. And to be able to do this, you're going to need to know how to label points. There's a video on doing that. It's number 11 and it's called Labeling Points. So I'm going to assume that you've watched that. So to do what we're going to do, you take the audio file, then you go to Annotate, and we're going to annotate to a text grid, and this will give you by default some other set of names, but call it, for instance, beat, and then make sure that the point tier is the same name as the tier that you've just given it. That's really important. If you don't understand why, watch video number 11. Okay, so then we hit OK, and it makes a text grid file which we can use alongside the sound file. So select both of those and then go View and Edit. You can see that we've now got three windows really. We've got in the top the waveform, then we've got the spectrogram, and then underneath we've got this beats tier. So this is the part here that we're going to be working on.
When's it due to be?
So let's select it, and I think we probably want to carry on selecting and going in more and more so that we can find the right place roughly to put the points. Now before we do this, I'm going to remind you that this is really kind of black magic. There's no one place where you can correctly locate a beat. Our sense of a beat comes from a whole range of different phonetic properties, including F0 peaks, amplitude peaks, what we know about the production of consonants and vowels, our knowledge of the syllable structure of the language, and so on. It's a gestalt, it's a very complex percept. So number one, don't worry too much about getting the beat in precisely the right place in scare quotes, because there isn't a precisely right place. But number two, do try and be relatively consistent, and I'm going to show you some ways that you can think about being consistent here. Let's start off with the first few syllables at the beginning, this when.
When's it?
And we'll select that. Now, I've been finding that one of the best, most reliable places to place a beat is on an F0 peak. So what we're going to be looking for is an F0 peak somewhere in a vocalic portion, and I think it's probably that bit there. And if we click somewhere in the F0, you'll see from the right what the F0 value is. So at the moment it's 245.8. The next one across is 250.1, and the next one across is 251.9. So let's stick a beat roughly there, and that kind of makes sense. You can see the although the F0 is relatively flat, and you probably won't hear the difference between 1 or 2 hertz at this sort of pitch level. Let's nonetheless put the beat roughly where F0 is pretty high, where it makes as much of a peak as we can get, and you can see that there's also a bit of an amplitude peak there. We're going to mark it just by sticking a star on it.
When's it?
Okay, and the next beat was on the next when. It's always difficult to do this, so I would say zoom out a couple of times till you think that you're in roughly the right place again. So there's the next when.
When.
And again, we're looking for an F0 peak, and you can see it's not easy to find because the pitch is rather level here. But at this point it's 249.9, at that point it's 252.3, at that one it's 252.7, so let's stick it there, and that seems like a reasonable kind of place. So you can see it's in the vocalic portion, the F0 is relatively high and the amplitude is going up. The amplitude is the yellow line. So when's it? The next one was on due, and due is going to be around here. Okay, so let's go select on due, and again you can see the F0 is really quite level. Let's start around there. That's 239.6, 240, that one's 241, 241.8, 0.5. Yeah, around here will be fine. Let's stick a beat there. You might actually want to move it across a little bit, because I think if I look, it looks to me like the center of the amplitude curve is more there where I've just put it. Actually, I think you could probably put a beat anywhere roughly in this area and you will be more or less correct. So there's due. And then the next beat was somewhere on B, and B is here on the right of this. There we are. Now this has got a rising intonation contour.
B.
You can hear. And here what we want is the F0 prominence, which is actually not the highest part of F0 but the lowest point of the F0, because it's a rise, so rise starts on a fairly low value. So now we're going to look for a low F0 value which also corresponds with an amplitude peak, and that's going to be roughly around here. So that one is 244 Hertz. If you look at the amplitude contour you can see it's just reaching its peak. The next one long is 242, so that's a little bit lower. Next one long is 244. So again, I think somewhere around here will be okay. Remember, these numbers are never precise and cannot be very precise, but as long as we have a sensible rationale for doing what we're doing. So now what we want to do is look at the intervals and see how they relate to one another. So we go zoom out, and there we've got the whole thing.
When's it due to be?
And if we just click the selection, now what we can do is measure how long the intervals are between each of these labels. So that one is 0.34 seconds, so about a third of a second. That one's 0.32, so it's a little bit less. And the next one is quite a bit less, 0.23, a bit less than a quarter of a second. So I guess the next question is, what would happen if this final beat were placed at the same sort of interval as these others? In other words, if this beat fell about a third of a second after the last one. Let's have a go. I can do this roughly by eye, I think. That's almost right. If we go a little bit further, into 3, something like that. So we get there, which is, you can hear it's just before the volume dies away in B. So that just shows you that the sense of rhythm and our sense of rhythmicity is not precisely measurable in value terms. So that's roughly where we had the beat before, but if you locate the P center, it's probably closer to there. And I think this kind of mismatch here might also be a product of the fact that this vowel here is so much longer.
B.
And that's partly because it's it's utterance final, and utterance final things tend to get stretched out. Anyway, there's a technique that you can use for annotating beats in talk, remember that you also need to understand how to label points, and that's video number 11.